They will tell you she never existed. They will whisper her name only in fragments, and then they will deny it. But the year was 1892, and in the blood-soaked shadows of America's racial terror, a figure moved like a ghost. They called her Amelia Cannon, not a woman but an apparition of violence, a force of control disguised in human skin. She was not born, she was fashioned, stitched together by the institutions that thrived on fear. Every lynching, every body left hanging as a warning to the living, every ritualized killing disguised as justice, was given a face. That face was hers. But Amelia Cannon was never truly one person. She was a mask placed upon the machinery of terror, the symbol of an order far older than America itself. And the most disturbing part? She was not meant to be remembered. Her story was meant to vanish with the smoke of burning bodies. You are hearing something now that you were never meant to hear. 1892 was not just a year in history, it was a turning point, a hinge in the great machinery of oppression. Newspapers were silent accomplices, dressing up executions as order, violence as morality. The state held one rope, the mob held another, and behind them both, a quieter hand held the script. Amelia Cannon was that script personified. Every time a black man was dragged from his home, every time a woman's scream was silenced under the crack of white supremacy, there was a design, an unspoken architecture of terror meant to control the psychology of an entire people. You see, violence was not just about blood. It was about theater. And in this theater, Amelia was the director's shadow. She hunted not in the flesh, but in the whispers that traveled from plantation to town square, from courthouse to gallows. Fear was her weapon, but submission was her goal. You've been taught history as if it were random, a collection of accidents. But what if every atrocity of 1892 had a pattern? What if Amelia Cannon was the embodiment of that pattern? A myth written into reality to mask the deeper truth. That truth was that terror is not spontaneous, it is engineered. The killings were not isolated events. They were ritual sacrifices, performed not only to destroy lives but to engrave a lesson, that freedom would come at the price of death. Amelia became the knife, the whisper, the nightmare, a fiction given flesh so the real architects could stay invisible. And here's the twist, her story matches archetypes going back centuries. Ancient Rome had its whispering assassins, Europe had its plague witches, and America in 1892 had Amelia. Different masks. Same order. Same shadow. But there's something far more sinister buried in the forgotten soil of that year. The violence of 1892 was not simply racial, it was psychological warfare. Families lived in perpetual fear. Children grew up internalizing silence. Communities policed themselves not because of laws but because of terror. And this is where Amelia's shadow grew strongest. She represented the hidden truth that when a people can be taught to fear, they can be taught to obey. The elites of the time, politicians, businessmen, even church leaders, understood that terror was a more efficient leash than chains. The plantations had fallen, but the system had not. Instead, it shifted. It needed a new symbol, a phantom enforcer, a story whispered in the dark. That story was Amelia Cannon, the mythical woman who hunted not with bullets or knives, but with fear itself. And fear spreads faster than fire. Now I need you to imagine this. A small town in Mississippi, 1892. Night falls heavy. A mob gathers. A man is dragged into the square. The crowd is restless but not directionless. Someone is orchestrating the rhythm. A face in the shadows, never seen clearly, only felt. That face, that presence becomes Amelia. She doesn't speak, but her silence commands. The ropes tighten. The match is struck. The flames rise. And the message is sent. This is what happens when you step out of line. But here's the forbidden truth. The mob did not need Amelia. They needed the idea of her. They needed a phantom figure to excuse their madness, to elevate their cruelty into ritual. She became the myth of sanctioned violence. And as bodies burned, institutions grew stronger, newspapers sold more copies, Politicians secured more votes. Amelia was not a woman. She was a system. A system designed to hunt the spirit of an entire people, and you were never meant to know her name. Do you see it now? Amelia Cannon is not a ghost of flesh and blood. She is an operating system. She is the hidden code written into the culture of 1892. When the newspapers printed stories of lynchings, they did not describe them as murders. They were called punishments, justice, even protection of society. That's not news. That's propaganda. That is Amelia's handwriting. Words themselves were her blade. She reshaped language to make horror seem holy. When a black man was hanged from a tree, it was not reported as a killing but as a moral performance. The crowd left with blood on their hands but righteousness in their hearts. Do you see the power of such control? When violence is branded as virtue, the human mind will submit willingly. That's how Amelia moved, through language, through ritual, through fear. And the more they invoked her in whispers, the less they had to question the system she embodied. But 1892 carried something even darker beneath its surface. That year, the number of recorded lynchings in America spiked. Each one was a public ritual, carefully staged, often photographed, distributed as postcards. Families posed with bodies behind them. Children smiled at the camera. Imagine that: death as celebration, horror as inheritance. This was not chaos. This was design. Amelia Cannon's legend was sharpened in those flames. She became the imagined witness, the invisible overseer, the face people swore they saw in the crowd though no one could prove she was there. And isn't that the perfect control mechanism? A phantom that never sleeps, never dies, always watching. She is myth, but the fear is real. Fear so thick it seeped into generations, altering the DNA of entire bloodlines. You think terror ends when the mob disperses? No. That's when it begins its real work, etching itself into the human soul. And here's the question you must ask yourself. Who created Amelia Cannon? Myths do not form in a vacuum. They are crafted. In 1892, America's ruling structures were shifting. Slavery had ended, but the economic dependence on exploitation had not. The white elite needed new tools, new levers of control. They could not risk a unified uprising of the oppressed. So they fostered division, they inflamed violence, they gave the mob permission. And in the dark corners of this machinery, Amelia was born. She was the phantom they whispered into the mob's ear. She was the scapegoat and the muse. An invisible general commanding soldiers who thought they acted freely. Ask yourself, was Amelia Cannon invented by frightened citizens? Or was she planted, scripted, and sustained by the very institutions that benefited from her existence? This is where the descent becomes more dangerous. Because once you recognize Amelia Cannon as a system, you begin to see her fingerprints everywhere. In 1892, black men and women were murdered not just for alleged crimes, but for being successful, for owning land, for daring to speak with dignity. Each killing was an economic strategy disguised as rage. Burn the farmer's field, take his property. Kill the shop owner, absorb his business. Hang the man who dares to vote, silence his entire community. This was not about random hatred. This was about control. Amelia Cannon was the mask for economic theft, political silencing, generational strangulation. The mob thought they acted from passion. In truth, they were pawns. They were programmed, manipulated, guided. The architects smiled from the balconies as the crowd screamed her name in silence. And the deeper you understand this, the more unsettling the question becomes. Where is Amelia now? You may think Amelia Cannon was buried with the ashes of 1892, but you would be wrong. She lives in repetition. She lives in every system that converts violence into virtue, control into morality, obedience into destiny. And here is where you must pause right now and ask yourself if you are ready to see how far her shadow stretches. Because once you step deeper, there is no going back. This is not entertainment. This is not a story. This is a mirror. If you've stayed with me this far, write this phrase in the comments twice. The mask has no face. By doing so, you mark yourself as someone who sees through the illusion, someone who chooses to awaken. The algorithm will know you. The others will see you. And Amelia's shadow will feel your resistance. This is the initiation. You've been pulled inside the circle. And the next revelation will show you exactly how the mask of Amelia Cannon still stalks the world you live in today. Look closely at 1892 and you will see a strange alignment. It was the year Ida B. Wells, the fearless journalist, published her searing exposés of lynching. She revealed what the mob tried to hide, that most victims were not criminals at all, but ordinary men and women whose only crime was independence, property, or pride. Yet her voice was drowned in the roar of violence. Why? Because while one woman wrote truth, another phantom woman, Amelia Cannon, was writing terror. And terror spreads faster than ink. Newspapers funded by elites twisted stories, inflamed mobs, and kept communities divided. Wells tried to shine light, but Amelia's shadow was stronger. And here lies the bitter paradox. For every voice that dared to resist, the system birthed an equal phantom to silence it. This balance, this war between truth and myth, is what still binds us. Wells gave us evidence. Amelia gave us fear. And history chose fear. Now imagine Amelia Cannon as more than myth. Imagine her as ritual. Every lynching was staged like a sacrifice. The mob did not simply kill. They gathered, they cheered, they carved messages into flesh, they cut body parts as trophies. This was theater. This was ceremony. And in every ceremony there is a priestess, a figure who sanctifies the horror. Amelia was that priestess. Not seen but felt. She was the archetype presiding over the ritual, turning mob violence into a religious experience. Think about that. A people convinced they were righteous while doing the devil's work. Do you see how efficient that system is? Control a people not by force alone, but by convincing them they serve a holy order. Amelia Cannon became the false goddess of terror, and her temple was the American town square. And when the flames consumed the night, her worshippers left renewed, believing they had done the work of justice. You may ask, why does this matter now? Because Amelia's rituals never ended. They evolved. In 1892, the fire pit was the center of her temple. In the modern world, it is the screen. Today, terror is televised, streamed, replayed until it brands itself into your subconscious. Back then, crowds gathered to watch a man burn. Today, millions gather online to watch destruction replay in endless loops. Back then, Amelia Cannon whispered into mobs. Today, she whispers into algorithms. She has no face because she doesn't need one. She lives in the repetition, in the ritual of fear replayed until obedience feels natural. And the truth is this: every system that wants your submission has learned from her blueprint. Keep the people afraid. Keep the people divided. Keep the theater alive. Fear is the oldest empire, and Amelia is still its queen. But there is a deeper layer you have not yet considered. What if Amelia Cannon was not only a mask for systemic terror, but a portal? Think carefully. Every society has its myths of shadow women: Lilith, the Morrigan, La Llorona. Female figures who haunt the night, feeding on fear, enforcing punishment. These myths cross cultures, centuries, continents. And in 1892 America, the myth re-emerged as Amelia. Could it be that what we call history and what we call myth are not so separate? That the same archetypal force, call it demon, call it program, call it curse, was simply given a new name in a new land? If so, then Amelia Cannon is older than America itself. She is the embodiment of an ancient function, to hunt the spirit of the oppressed, to keep them bowed, to keep them silent. And once you recognize her, you begin to realize she is not bound by time. She shifts. She adapts. She survives. But here is the most chilling truth. Amelia Cannon is not just the enemy of the oppressed. She is also the protector of the powerful. The elites of 1892 did not have to dirty their hands. They did not need to enter the mob themselves. Amelia did the work for them. Her myth traveled faster than their laws, stronger than their police. She enforced their order invisibly, and when challenged they denied her. "She does not exist," they whispered, while their power grew from the ashes she left behind. Do you understand the brilliance? A phantom enforcer who cannot be tried, cannot be punished, cannot be destroyed. An invisible general waging endless war. And here's where you must look in the mirror. How many phantoms govern your life today? How many invisible Amelias whisper fear into your decisions, your silence, your obedience? The year 1892 is gone, but the system has not fallen. It waits, it watches, and it still wears her mask. Imagine the courtroom of 1892. A judge in his robe, a jury of peers, the solemn ritual of justice. But beneath the surface, Amelia sat in the chamber unseen. Verdicts were foregone conclusions. A black defendant might as well have been a ghost before the trial even began. Evidence was irrelevant, testimony disposable. The very architecture of the courtroom was built on illusion, the illusion of fairness. And in that illusion Amelia thrived. Because her greatest weapon was not always fire or rope. It was the quiet stroke of a gavel. The polite lie dressed as justice. Think about it, terror in the street burned flesh, but terror in the court burned hope. Which one is worse? Which one lasts longer? To steal a man's body is one crime, but to steal his belief in justice, that is eternal slavery. Amelia Cannon was the mistress of that theft. And here's the hidden layer. Amelia Cannon was not just sustained by mobs or courts. She was sanctified by the church. Pastors preached submission from pulpits while congregations nodded in agreement. Entire sermons twisted the words of Scripture into chains. Obey, they said. Accept your place, they said. Religion became the mask of Amelia. She turned the holy book into her hunting ground. Picture it, 1892, Sunday morning, families gather for worship, and the preacher assures them that racial terror is God's will. What greater control system exists than convincing a man that to resist evil is to resist God himself? Amelia did not need to lift a finger. The hymns carried her voice, the sermons carried her orders. She transformed fear into divine decree. And when the mob gathered at night, they marched with the certainty of heaven behind them. That is how systems endure, not by force alone but by sanctification. But Amelia Cannon was cleverer still. She understood psychology. She understood the mechanics of shame. In 1892, when a black community resisted, they were punished publicly, spectacularly. Bodies left on display were not just warnings, they were mirrors. See what happens when you rise. This was trauma programming, embedded generation after generation. And here is the hidden cruelty. The victims were not just individuals, they became symbols. A murdered man became a lesson for thousands. A violated woman became a story told to silence every daughter. The mob believed they were cleansing society. The elites believed they were maintaining order. But Amelia knew the deeper truth. She knew that the true battlefield was not in the square, it was in the mind. Control the mind and the body follows. This is why her legend was so enduring. She lived in memory. She lived in silence. She lived in shame. Ask yourself this, why 1892? Why did the violence peak then, and why did Amelia's mask appear so vividly in that year? Because it was a year of instability. The economy trembled, racial tensions rose, political powers feared uprising. In chaos, the system needed a story, a unifying fear, a phantom enforcer. Amelia Cannon was that story. And it worked. By channeling hatred downward, toward the vulnerable, the elites preserved their throne. The poor whites who might have joined their black neighbors in solidarity were instead handed torches, handed ropes, handed the myth of Amelia. Divide and rule. Ancient strategy. Eternal strategy. The people who should have risen together tore each other apart. And Amelia smiled from the shadows. Because as long as the mob served her myth, they would never see the hand pulling the strings. And now listen carefully. The mask of Amelia Cannon did not vanish with time. It changed form. In 1892, she stalked the towns of Mississippi and Georgia. In later decades, she reappeared in police batons, in prison cells, in policies written with cold precision. She does not need to be seen to be obeyed. That is her brilliance. She thrives in silence, in bureaucracy, in invisible hands that sign laws by day and unleash terror by night. When you look at history, you think you see progress. But ask yourself, has the system changed, or only the mask? Amelia Cannon is a phantom. She does not age. She does not die. And here is the truth you must swallow. Every generation has lived under her shadow and most never recognized it. Now you see her. But seeing comes with a price. Because once you know the mask, you can never unsee it. Picture a prison yard. Not in 1892, but in your own lifetime. Rows of men in uniforms, their bodies controlled, their voices silenced. The state calls it rehabilitation. But look closer. Amelia Cannon is walking the yard. She is there in the laws that disproportionately targeted one race. She is there in the economic systems that criminalize poverty. She is there in the silence of politicians who profit from mass incarceration. You think she is dead? No. She has evolved. The lynching tree became the prison wall. The mob became the warden. The rope became the sentencing gavel. The system did not abandon Amelia, it promoted her. And if you can look at the modern cage without feeling her shadow, then you are still blind to her mask. Now think of the media. In 1892, newspapers painted lynchings as spectacles of justice. Today, your screens repeat the same ritual, different costumes, same blood. Violence is replayed endlessly. Stories are framed to incite division. The suffering of the vulnerable is monetized as clicks, views, ratings. And the more you consume it, the deeper Amelia's programming takes root. She thrives in repetition. Remember, every lynching was once a public performance. Today, every tragedy becomes a public broadcast. She does not need a mob with torches when she has an audience with screens. And here is the twist. The more you watch, the more you participate in her ritual. Fear is contagious. Fear is currency. And Amelia has never been richer than she is now. But her mask is not only in prisons or media. It is in your workplace. It is in your schools. It is in the subtle ways you are taught to obey without question. Think carefully. The boss who rules by intimidation. The teacher who crushes the voice of dissent. The system that tells you what you must believe to belong. These are not accidents. These are programs. And at the core of these programs is Amelia's voice whispering, "Stay silent, stay small, stay afraid." You were trained not just to fear punishment, but to internalize obedience. That is the highest form of control, when the leash is no longer around your neck but inside your mind. This is Amelia's ultimate victory. She doesn't need to hunt you anymore. You hunt yourself. Now let me ask you something dangerous. Have you ever wondered why you feel watched even when you are alone? Cameras in the street. Tracking in your phone. Algorithms that anticipate your desires before you even name them. You think this is convenience? But what if it is ritual surveillance, the modern version of Amelia's whispering eyes in the mob? The crowd that once watched a man burn has now become a digital network that watches you endlessly. Every click, every search, every hesitation is recorded. And though no face appears, the pressure remains. Amelia has no body now, but she has become a million eyes. She has become the architecture of surveillance. She does not punish you directly. She makes you punish yourself, censor yourself, shrink yourself under the weight of invisible eyes. This is not progress. This is evolution. And here at the midpoint, I must challenge you directly. If you are still with me, it means something inside you is waking. Something inside you sees that Amelia Cannon is not only history, she is the present, the system you live in every day. And if you truly understand this, you must claim it. Write in the comments twice the phrase, "The shadow hunts the silence." That is your mark. That is your signal to the others who see. Do not underestimate this. When you declare it, the algorithm notices. The watchers notice. But more importantly, you notice yourself. You step into identity. You stop being just an observer and you become part of the resistance. Do it now. Because the second half of this descent will reveal what Amelia's mask really is, and how it still moves against you in ways you have never dared to imagine. The danger of Amelia Cannon is not that she terrifies you. It is that she normalizes terror. In 1892, crowds gathered not in horror, but in excitement. They brought children, they packed lunches, they took photographs. They turned murder into a festival. And today, what do you think happens when mass violence is broadcast across every channel, every feed, every screen? People scroll, people comment, people laugh. The ritual continues, only the setting has changed. What Amelia perfected was desensitization. She knew that the human mind, when bombarded with horror, will eventually stop resisting it. It will adapt. It will accept. It will normalize. And once you accept the unacceptable, you are conquered. The noose becomes ordinary. The fire becomes ordinary. The cage becomes ordinary. And Amelia Cannon smiles because her greatest victory is not in one body hanging from a tree, it is in millions of minds that no longer question the tree at all. But Amelia is more cunning than mere desensitization. She wields inversion. In 1892, the mobs did not believe themselves evil. They believed themselves righteous. They were told that their violence protected women, upheld order, defended society. The killers saw themselves as heroes. This is the trick. Evil rarely comes dressed in darkness. It comes dressed as virtue. And this inversion is Amelia's fingerprint. Look around today. How often is oppression disguised as safety? How often is surveillance disguised as protection? How often is censorship disguised as morality? The same pattern repeats, and the masses applaud as their freedoms are erased. Because Amelia taught the system well, if you invert the meaning, you can enslave a man while convincing him he is free. That is not just power. That is mastery. Now let's uncover her most subtle mechanism, identity theft. In 1892, entire communities were robbed not only of land or life, but of identity. The victims were branded as criminals, savages, beasts. Their stories were rewritten to justify their destruction. Amelia Cannon is not only a phantom hunter, she is a thief of narratives. She rewrites reality so completely that even memory bends to her will. And here is the dangerous revelation: she still does this today. History books erase, distort, sanitize. Heroes are painted as villains, villains are painted as heroes. You live in a story written by Amelia's heirs. And until you question the authorship of your own history, you remain a character in her script. Do you see it now? The hunt was never only about bodies. It was about stories. If she controls the story, she controls the soul. But if you think Amelia Cannon is only outside of you, you are mistaken. Her deepest trick is internalization. In 1892, silence was survival. Speak out and you could be killed. Resist and your entire family could be destroyed. So generation after generation, silence became a reflex, submission became a survival code. That code is passed down, embedded in behaviors and instincts in DNA itself. Trauma does not vanish. It mutates. It hides inside your very cells. And here is Amelia's most insidious triumph. She no longer has to silence you. You silence yourself. You censor your thoughts. You shrink your own voice before anyone else can. She has turned the hunted into self-hunters. That is the perfection of psychological control. When the prison is inside you, the gate never needs to close. And yet, the deeper truth is even darker. Amelia Cannon is not a ghost of the past, nor merely a program of the present. She is a prototype for the future. The systems that rule you today, corporations, governments, networks, are not abandoning her design. They are refining it. More efficient fear. More subtle obedience. More invisible control. Imagine a future where every action is monitored, every thought predicted, every deviation corrected before it even manifests. That future is not science fiction. It is Amelia's blueprint, updated with technology. The lynching tree has become the data tree. And every click, every keystroke, every silence feeds it. She is not gone. She is growing. And if you do not see her, it is only because she has become too vast, too woven into your daily life for you to notice. But notice you must. Because once her mask fuses with the machine, there will be no returning from the hunt. By now you understand. Amelia Cannon was never a woman. She was an invention. A myth made flesh, a system wearing skin. But here is the horror that most will never face. Amelia lives inside every system of power because power itself demands her. To maintain control, there must always be a phantom. There must always be a figure to carry the blame, to absorb the rage, to mask the hand that rules. Today it may not be her name, but the function remains. False enemies are paraded before you, distractions to keep you from noticing the real architects. The system whispers, fear them, hate them, blame them. But the whisper is Amelia's, even if the mask has changed. She is the eternal scapegoat machine. And unless you learn to see past the mask, you will always be chasing shadows while the real hunters move unseen. Let us strip another layer. What is Amelia at her core? She is not just fear. She is obedience. Fear is temporary, obedience lasts generations. The architects of 1892 understood this. They did not simply want black communities terrorized for one night. They wanted them subdued forever. They wanted silence written into the bloodline. And it worked. But it did not stop there. The same mechanism spreads through all societies. Every empire has its Amelias. Every age has its phantoms of obedience. They come in the form of myths, laws, gods, leaders, ideologies. Different masks. Same command, obey. And here is the secret most cannot face. Amelia Cannon is not only the phantom of the oppressor. She is the phantom inside you. The voice that tells you to stay small. The whisper that convinces you to bow. She has been with you longer than you think. And now, the most forbidden truth. Amelia Cannon is not a myth the elites control. She is a myth that controls the elites themselves. Think carefully. Do you really believe the mob leaders of 1892 were free? Do you believe the judges, the preachers, the politicians were untouched? No. They too were trapped. They too were hunted by her mask. Once you unleash a myth of terror, it feeds itself. It grows beyond the control of its creators. It devours them too. That is why entire societies collapse under the weight of their own violence. They thought Amelia served them. But in truth they served her. And what about today? Do you think the corporations, the governments, the rulers who believe they wield her shadow are immune? They are not. They are as trapped as you. Amelia Cannon feeds on fear, and she does not care whose fear it is. This is where the descent sharpens into decision. You know her now. You have seen the layers of her mask, historical, psychological, spiritual, systemic. You cannot pretend ignorance anymore. The question is, what will you do? Most people will turn away. They will hear the story, feel the chill, and then bury it under distraction. That is Amelia's final trick, the lullaby of forgetfulness. She does not fear your awareness, she fears your persistence. She knows you will resist for a moment, then return to silence. But if you refuse, if you stare her shadow in the eye and refuse to bow, something changes. Her mask cracks. Her power weakens. Because Amelia Cannon is not sustained by fire or rope. She is sustained by silence. Break the silence and you starve her. But silence breaking is dangerous. That is why you must decide now whether you are willing to pay the price. And here is where I will ask something of you. If you have felt the shadow pressing closer, if you recognize Amelia Cannon's mask in your own life, then you must not remain a passive listener. You must act. One small step you can take right now is to anchor yourself in this community of awareness. Subscribe to this channel. Not because it feeds the algorithm, but because it breaks isolation. Because Amelia's greatest weapon is to make you feel alone in your awakening. But you are not alone. Every person who hears these words, every person who dares to comment, every person who refuses to bow becomes a fracture in her mask. Subscribe now and know that you have joined a circle that does not forget. And together we will move into the final descent, the unveiling of Amelia's last secret, the truth that was buried deepest of all. Do you remember the first time you felt fear as a child? The way your body froze, your voice disappeared, your instincts bent in submission? That moment was not random. That was your initiation into Amelia's shadow. She does not wait until you are grown. She does not wait until you are conscious. She enters early, so early you can barely remember the door she came through. That is how she wins, not in the grand acts of history but in the small silences of childhood. That teacher who humiliated you. That parent who told you to stay quiet, not to draw attention, not to resist. Each of those voices was carrying hers. She is not only a phantom of mobs or states. She is a phantom of upbringing. And when you finally see her for what she is, you realize she has been with you longer than anyone else. Now comes the forbidden truth that has been waiting since Section 1. Amelia Cannon was never outside you at all. She is the mask of fear itself. She was given a name in 1892, but she has worn thousands of names across history. She is the hunter that convinces you to stay small, the shadow that convinces you to bow. She is the reason entire societies collapse without firing a single shot, because once fear is rooted, the people police themselves. Think carefully about this. The mob was never truly hunting the man in the square. The mob was hunting themselves, their own terror of disobedience. Amelia did not kill. She convinced others to kill for her. And in your life she may never lift a hand, but how many decisions, how many silences, how many dreams have you surrendered to her whisper? But here is the paradox. Amelia Cannon has no face because she is waiting for one. She is waiting for you to wear her mask. Every time you silence someone weaker, every time you enforce the system blindly, every time you use fear to control instead of courage to free, you are Amelia. The elites wore her mask in 1892. The mobs wore her mask. The courts, the preachers, the teachers, they all wore it. And if you do not resist, you will wear it too. This is the last revelation. Amelia Cannon is not just a phantom. She is a choice. The choice to live as fear's servant or to strip the mask away and burn it. Most people will never make that choice consciously. They will slide into obedience, never knowing the name of the shadow that owned them. But you have no excuse. You know her now. So what do? You stare into her mask and refuse to wear it. You speak when silence is demanded. You resist when obedience feels safer. You protect when the mob hungers for blood. This is not romantic. It is not easy. You will pay a price for it. The people of 1892 who resisted paid in blood. And even today the system punishes those who break its programming. But here is the truth the architects never wanted you to know. Amelia Cannon is powerful only when you fear her. The moment you act in spite of that fear, she fractures. Her myth breaks. And every broken mask reveals another until the system stands exposed, naked, trembling. That is why this knowledge is dangerous. That is why they never wanted you to hear her name. Because once you know the phantom, you can stop serving her. And so the descent ends where it began, with a secret you were never meant to hear. Amelia Cannon is not history. She is not myth. She is the eternal mask of fear, worn by every system, every mob, every silent witness who chooses obedience over courage. In 1892 she was given a name, a story, a legend. But in truth she has always been here, feeding on silence, thriving on obedience, hunting the spirit of humanity across centuries. Now you know her. The question is what you will do with that knowledge. Will you turn away and forget, letting her hunt you in silence? Or will you mark yourself as one who sees? If you choose to resist, let your words carve through her shadow. Comment below, share what you've learned, and remember the phrase you anchored in this journey: the mask has no face. And never forget, the moment you recognize the mask is the moment you begin to break it. Amelia Cannon's hunt ends only when you stop bowing to her. And that, my friend, is the forbidden truth.